Her son told her she was the wrong parent who survived, then slammed the door in her face. Claire Hensley, widow and former ICU nurse, didn't argue. 6 months later, the same son got a certified letter. He no longer owned a single acre of the land he was born to inherit. Her will, the deed, the trust, every document now answered only to her name. Legacy, she decided, was never about blood. And when he came crawling back, the garden was already blooming, without him. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The wind cut sharp through the early morning haze as Claire stepped out of her car, arms full, groceries in one bag, a quart of homemade soup swaying precariously in the other. Her breath fogged in the air. The walk up the icy drive to her son's front steps was familiar and foreign all at once, like revisiting a language she'd once known fluently but now had to relearn, word by word. The snow on the porch hadn't been cleared. She set the bags down and picked up the snow shovel from the side, the same one she and her husband had gifted Ryan 5 winters ago. Her hands, stiff in thin gloves, worked carefully, slicing a narrow path through crusted white. Each scrape echoed into the quiet suburb like a judgment. Claire hadn't seen Ryan in 6 months. The last message she got from Emily had been brief. Ryan slipped a disc. "He's been in pain. We're managing, but maybe you could come help." No apology. No warmth. Just duty, thinly veiled as request. She knocked once, then twice more when no answer came. The curtains didn't move, but she saw shadows cross inside. A pause. Then the sound of the deadbolt turning. Ryan opened the door with one hand braced on the frame. His face was pale, jaw unshaven, hair sticking up like he'd just woken. He looked older than 38, or maybe just angrier. "Hey," Claire said softly, offering a tired smile. "I brought—" "You were the wrong parent who survived," he said. Her heart didn't drop. It didn't even flinch. It stopped. For a full second, everything stilled. The wind, the breath in her lungs, the echo of her boots crunching on ice. Her hands clenched slightly on the bags. Not from fear, from instinct, from knowing that if she let go of something she might collapse. Inside, Tommy's voice called faintly from another room. "Who's here?" Emily appeared behind Ryan, her eyes red-rimmed. She wasn't wearing makeup, something Claire had never seen in their entire 15-year marriage. "He's just tired," Emily murmured, one hand touching Ryan's shoulder like she was trying to calm a dog after lightning. Claire said nothing. Ryan didn't move aside. He just stared, eyes flat. Claire bent, slowly, placed the grocery bag on the step, then the soup beside it. "There's enough for a few days," she said, voice measured. "Soup's still hot. I didn't add garlic. Emily doesn't like it." Emily's mouth twitched, a thank you caught in her throat but never spoken. "I cleared the walk," Claire added. "It's slippery." Ryan's face didn't change. "I said what I meant." Claire looked at him, really looked at him, the sullen mouth he'd inherited from his father. The same dismissive jawline, always set in judgment. But his eyes had never belonged to anyone but himself. Empty now, not broken, just unwilling. She nodded once, not in agreement, in understanding. "I'll come by Friday to shovel again," she said. "You don't need to," he snapped. "I didn't ask." She turned and walked back to the car. She didn't look behind her. Inside, the door closed. A soft click, like a final period on a sentence she didn't get to finish. But Claire wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. The photograph on the mantel hadn't moved. Claire stood in the quiet living room of her own house, their house, though no one said ours anymore, and stared at the frame like it might blink. It was from a 4th of July picnic 15 years ago, the last summer Ryan had smiled without irony. Her husband, Alan, had his arm thrown around him, both wearing matching caps from a baseball game Claire hadn't been invited to. She pulled the knit shawl tighter around her shoulders and turned away. The air felt thinner here lately, as if even the walls had started taking sides. In the kitchen, the kettle screamed before she remembered she'd set it on. She poured the water into her mug, let it steep without thinking. The tea bag bled out like something injured. Her husband's funeral hadn't been crowded, just solemn, sparse, and cold in that early March way Minnesota refuses to let go of winter. Ryan had given the eulogy with practiced detachment, reading from his phone while Claire sat in the front pew next to an empty seat Alan should have filled months earlier, apologizing for everything he never said. Ryan never looked at her. Not once. She could still hear the applause that followed his speech, polite and tight-lipped, words like strong and composed being whispered as if that was what grief demanded. What no one knew, what Claire had swallowed like rust, was that the last time Ryan had hugged her was a decade ago, the night after his college graduation. He'd been drunk, full of possibility and champagne, and for a split second her boy had returned. Then came the job, the wife, the distance that calcified, and Alan, always Alan, letting it happen. She'd once asked her husband gently why he didn't step in when Ryan ignored her in conversations or left her name off holiday plans. Alan had shrugged. He's figuring it out, don't push him. But time didn't fix what no one challenged. The filing cabinet creaked as she opened it, the one Alan kept locked in his study with a sense of quiet pride, like the paperwork inside was more sacred than their marriage. Claire slid open the top drawer. Bills, tax returns, post-it notes in Alan's looping script, organized and brittle with age. Second drawer down, tucked behind a manila folder labeled probate notes, she found it. A joint property deed. Her name listed alongside his in steady ink. A draft will, signed but never notarized. Ryan's name circled faintly in pencil, with a line drawn through it. Claire sat down at the old oak desk, the one they'd bought at an estate sale 20 years ago. The chair wobbled slightly under her weight. She read the pages once, then again, slower. It wasn't finished, but it was enough. The front door opened and closed with a gust. Marcia didn't knock anymore. She never had. She moved through the house like it owed her nothing and gave everything. A scent of menthol and cold air followed her. "I brought lemon cake," she called, then stopped when she saw Claire at the desk. Marcia raised one eyebrow. "That his?" Claire nodded. Marcia walked over, read the top of the will, and whistled low. "Well, damn. That changes things." Claire looked up. "He never filed it." Marcia reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a tissue, and handed it over like it was a trade. "He never stopped enabling Ryan either." There was no judgment in her voice, just truth, bare and sanded. "I think he thought love was silence," Claire murmured. Marcia scoffed. "Silence isn't love. It's just cowardice in a nicer suit." They sat without speaking for a while. Outside, the wind slapped against the windows like a reminder. Winter wasn't done yet. Finally, Claire folded the documents and slid them into a folder labeled Evelyn Marks. She clicked it shut with a finality that felt physical. "You don't owe loyalty to abuse," Marcia said quietly. Claire didn't answer. She didn't need to. The estate attorney's office sat on the edge of downtown, squeezed between a shuttered florist shop and a dentist's office with a flickering neon molar. The sort of place people only came to when someone died, got divorced, or sued their neighbor over a fence line. Claire parked under the brittle shadow of a bare oak tree and stared at the brick facade a moment longer than necessary. Inside, the warmth didn't help. It felt clinical, too still, like grief had passed through often enough to leave residue. Evelyn Marks looked exactly as Claire remembered, tall, silver-streaked hair twisted into a knot, face lined not with age, but precision. She stood when Claire entered, extended a hand without ceremony. "Let's see what you've got," Evelyn said, gesturing to the folder. Claire handed it over, watching as Evelyn flipped through the pages with the kind of speed that only comes from decades of cleanly dissecting family secrets. "Drafted in 2015. No notary, no final execution," she said without lifting her eyes. "This isn't valid." Claire nodded as if she'd expected it. "What does that mean, in plain language?" Evelyn leaned back. "It means, legally, the estate defaults to the surviving spouse. That's you." Claire swallowed. She glanced at the framed certificates behind Evelyn. Law degrees, not kindness. "So, everything?" Evelyn listed it without inflection. Farmland, primary residence, any joint accounts or assets not separately titled. Assuming there's no other will out there, it's yours. The words didn't feel triumphant. They felt surgical. Claire folded her hands in her lap. Her nails were still edged with dirt from the garden beds she'd raked last week. And if I wanted to structure it differently? Evelyn arched one eyebrow. Differently how? Claire hesitated, the words catching like barbed wire. What happens if I don't include Ryan? For the first time, Evelyn paused. Not out of surprise, but deliberation. You're under no obligation to. He's not a minor. He's not listed in a valid document. If you choose not to name him, the law backs you. There was no judgment in the tone, just options. Claire nodded slowly. The silence swelled around her like it needed to breathe. Evelyn tapped the folder. You want me to start drawing up a new plan? Claire exhaled. Yes. Start from scratch. Evelyn nodded once. I'll need your financials. Retirement holdings, investments, land valuations, personal accounts. I have everything. It's organized, Claire said, and it sounded like a confession. Evelyn smiled, barely. That puts you ahead of 90% of my clients. Claire stood, slipping her gloves back on with care. This won't be easy. It never is, Evelyn replied, but it's clean, and that counts. As Claire stepped out into the brittle afternoon, she spotted a familiar figure across the street. Ryan, leaning against his car, tapping at his phone. He hadn't seen her yet. He looked impatient, head darting as if expecting someone. Claire didn't move. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from Emily. He thinks you're still at the house. Just let him cool off. Claire didn't reply. Ryan looked up suddenly, sensing something. For a split second, their eyes locked across the road. And then, he smiled. Not warmly, not even cruelly, just expectantly, like the future he assumed had already arrived. Claire stepped back into the shadow of the doorway. She waited until he looked away. Claire carried the casserole dish with both hands, wrapped in an old dish towel that smelled faintly of thyme and lemon. She knocked once, then let herself in, an old habit from better years, one that neither Ryan nor Emily had explicitly revoked. The lock was never changed. Inside, the house smelled like reheated coffee and closed doors. Claire stepped out of her boots, set the dish on the kitchen counter, and heard the television murmuring from the living room. She could tell by the cadence it was the local news, something Ryan left on more for background noise than interest. Emily appeared in the hallway wearing sweats and an oversized flannel. Her hair was tied up, her expression as unreadable as always. He's resting, she said, voice low. Still hasn't slept right. Claire nodded, though she doubted the man had ever truly rested a day in his life. I won't stay long. She unpacked the rest of the food she'd brought. Steamed rice, roasted vegetables, a loaf of bread still warm at the bottom. She moved with the quiet efficiency of someone used to being useful and unwelcome at the same time. When Ryan entered 20 minutes later, he made no effort to greet her. He sank into a kitchen chair like gravity owed him a favor and rubbed his lower back with an exaggerated sigh. His eyes were shadowed, the kind that came more from entitlement than exhaustion. Bills are bleeding us, he muttered to no one in particular. Property taxes, insurance, Christ, even the water bill's a joke. You'd think Dad would have planned better. Emily busied herself with silverware, not looking up. Claire sat across from them, her tea cooling untouched in front of her. She didn't ask what he meant. She already knew. She could feel the assumptions settling around him like a tailored coat. The land, the house, the investments, his birthright, waiting in escrow. Tommy appeared from the hallway holding a folded sheet of paper. His cheeks were flushed, hair tousled from nap or play. He moved quietly, as if instinctively aware of the atmosphere his parents created. I made this, he said, sliding the drawing toward Claire. She unfolded it carefully. A sketch of a farmhouse, a bright sun in the corner, big block letters across the top. Grandma's farm. The house looked like hers, right down to the broken fence near the mailbox. Claire smiled gently. You remembered the color of the barn, Tommy beamed. It's redder in spring, like ketchup. Before she could reply, Ryan let out a short, sharp laugh. She won't be around long enough to keep it, bud. Emily flinched, just barely. Claire didn't blink. Tommy looked at his father, confused, then at Claire. Something flickered behind his eyes, uncertainty or shame he hadn't earned. Claire folded the drawing neatly, smoothed the creases, and tucked it into her coat pocket. She rose without comment and began clearing the plates no one had thanked her for. The room was quiet, save for forks clinking and Ryan's occasional sighs. Claire's hands moved on their own, washing, rinsing, drying. She watched them work as if they belonged to someone else. She'd sat at this table so many times. For holidays, birthdays, half-hearted reconciliations. Each time she'd convinced herself there was still ground left to recover. But tonight, she saw it for what it was, a place she had been invited only when convenient. A seat granted with the same thoughtlessness as offering someone a coat they weren't meant to keep. Tommy leaned on her arm while she dried a mug. "Will you come again?" Claire paused. "If it's okay with your mom," she said softly. Emily nodded, but didn't speak. Ryan stood abruptly, stretching his back again like a man owed sympathy. "Next time, bring pie," he said, half mocking. "You used to be good at that." Claire looked at him for the first time all night. Not in anger, not in forgiveness, just long enough for him to know she was still there. Then she turned to Tommy. "Keep drawing things that matter, sweetheart." He nodded solemnly, like he understood more than anyone gave him credit for. The notary's pen clicked twice before sliding across the oak conference table. Evelyn handed Claire the last page of the revised trust paperwork with a kind of reverent finality, as if she knew exactly how much history was about to be rewritten in a single stroke of ink. Claire's hand didn't tremble, not even slightly. She signed her name, full name, middle initial sharp like a blade. Evelyn gathered the documents quickly, assembling them with a practiced snap. "This makes it real," she said. "Filed, recorded, notarized, effective immediately." Claire nodded. She looked smaller in the high-backed leather chair, but somehow heavier, more rooted, like whatever was inside her had settled permanently. "I added the contingent heir clause," Evelyn continued. "Tommy's designation won't grant him ownership until age 25, but his portion will be protected, with oversight like you asked. That also shields it from Ryan until then." Claire breathed in through her nose, then let it out in one slow release. "Good. And the Land Trust Board has accepted the stewardship proposal. They'll maintain and preserve it under the terms you outlined. Your name stays attached. Permanently." A small smile ghosted across Claire's face. "The farm won't be sold. Not gutted. Not buried under strip malls." Evelyn leaned back, folding her hands. "Ryan's going to find out, probably soon." Claire looked out the window. The sky was a dull pewter, flat and wide like it might never snow again. "I know." She was home by mid-afternoon, feeding a stray cat that had taken up residence under her back deck when the call came in. The number was familiar, Ryan's, but she didn't answer. She let it go to voicemail, twice. The third time he texted, "Why did I just get a notice that the trust account isn't mine anymore? What the hell is going on?" The message hung on the screen like a punch someone was too cowardly to throw in person. Claire didn't respond. She didn't have to. An hour later, the phone rang again. She answered this time. Ryan's voice was high, clipped, his version of angry trying to masquerade as controlled. "You moved everything. You rewrote it all. Without even telling me." Claire closed the dishwasher gently. "Yes? You're ruining my life." There was no pause before her reply. "You ended the part of mine you were in." For a beat, neither of them spoke. Then Ryan's voice cracked, just slightly. "You think this fixes anything?" "No," she said calmly. "It just stops the bleeding." He hung up. That night, Claire lit the wood stove and sat with a legal pad balanced on her lap. On it, a list with 2 columns, left behind, moved forward. She didn't fill in either. She just stared at the headers, letting the quiet claim the room. Marcia stopped by unannounced, a bottle of something cheap and unapologetic in hand. "I heard," she said, setting it on the table without sitting. Claire didn't ask how. Marcia always knew things before they were official. I hope you're ready, Marcia added. He'll escalate. Claire folded the legal pad shut. I'm not scared of him. I'm scared of wasting what's left. Marcia nodded once, solemn. Then you're finally living. Claire didn't go looking for the past. It had a way of arriving on its own, quietly, through familiar places you thought were neutral until they weren't. She was in the attic for something small, an extra blanket to send home with Marcia, maybe that old space heater that still worked if you kicked it twice, when her eyes landed on the cedar chest, wedged beneath a slope of insulation and rafters. The lid had a single strip of tape stretched across it, brittle now with age, but still legible. Do not open, Dad. Alan's handwriting. Thick block letters, sharp enough to feel like they had been scrawled in warning, not in jest. Claire crouched beside the chest, letting her knees protest the motion. Her hands hovered over the lid for a moment, unsure whether touching it would wake something better left sleeping. She should have walked away. That's what he had asked for, in his own rigid, controlling way. But Claire had learned something since Alan's death. Requests made in fear didn't deserve obedience. She peeled the tape back slowly, the sound ripping louder than it should have been in the stillness of the attic. Inside, the scent of cedar and something older, mustier, rose up around her, paper and years. The box was filled with a carefully stacked bundle of letters, bound together with a cracked rubber band. The envelopes were yellowed, their edges curling slightly, and each one had a handwritten date in the upper right corner. 1999, 2001, 2004, all addressed the same way. Dad, please read when you're ready. Don't show Mom. Claire stared at them, her breath stilled in her chest. She hadn't known, not a single one. These weren't love letters, and they weren't saved report cards or childhood drawings. These were pieces of Ryan, angry, confused, aching for connection. She lifted the first one and opened it carefully. I don't know how to talk to her. She makes everything weird, like she's trying too hard. I know she means well, but it just makes me mad. The handwriting was blocky, uncertain. He must have been 13. Another envelope followed. She cried again today. Over nothing. I think she does it to make me feel bad. You get it, though. You always get it. Claire read in silence, page after page. Ryan's voice changed over the years, deepened with adolescence, sharpened with a misplaced need to assign blame. There was no profanity, no hatred, but a tangle of misread intentions and adolescent logic that had calcified over time. These weren't the words of someone evil. They were the words of a boy trying to anchor himself to someone who let him stay angry rather than teach him to navigate it. And Alan had never shown her, never even hinted. He had folded these words up, tucked them away, and never once asked Claire if she wanted the chance to respond to their son's confusion before it hardened. By the time she reached the final letter, one written shortly after Ryan left for college, Claire felt something inside her unclench, then swell with a grief that was new and old at once. The tears came then, slow and reluctant, like her body wasn't used to allowing them anymore. She wiped them away quickly, not out of shame, but because she needed her hands for what came next. Downstairs, the fire in the wood stove still glowed from the morning burn. She added a few logs, watched them catch. Then, one by one, she placed the letters into the flames, not with rage, not even regret, but with resolve. Marcia arrived just after sunset, letting herself in without knocking. She stood by the stove for a moment, taking in the scene. Claire on her knees, hands smudged with ash, a bundle of half-charred envelopes on the hearth. You found something? Claire didn't look up. Letters, from Ryan, from when he was younger. Marcia knelt beside her, picked up one of the envelopes still unburned, and read just enough to understand. She set it down slowly. He wasn't cruel then, but he's grown into it. Claire nodded, and Alan made sure I never had a chance to interrupt that path. Neither woman spoke for a while. Outside, the wind picked up. The windows rattled faintly in their frames. Claire fed the last letter into the fire, then stood and dusted her palms on her jeans. I'm done guessing what I didn't know, she said. That's not my job anymore. The first real thaw came on a Saturday morning in early April. Not warm enough to trust it, but just enough that the ground had softened in patches and the birds had returned to test the still air. Claire stood at the edge of the backyard, sleeves rolled up, staring at the low garden bed she and Alan had built years ago, back when they still imagined things together. The wooden sides had weathered to a gentle gray, cracked in the corners, but it still held its shape, like it wanted to be used again. She heard the screen door creak behind her and turned to see Tommy step out onto the porch, jacket zipped to his chin, sleeves too long for his arms. He held the seed packet she'd given him in one hand, clutched like it might blow away. "They look like raisins," he said, coming down the steps and offering her the seeds with both palms open. "They do," Claire said, smiling. "But they're winter squash. They'll grow thick and orange if you give them the right care." Tommy crouched beside her as she knelt in the dirt. Together they pressed the seeds one by one into the soil, his fingers clumsy but careful. Claire watched him out of the corner of her eye, the furrow of concentration in his brow, the way he didn't flinch when the cold dirt packed under his nails. He worked like someone who wanted to understand something more than just gardening. After a few quiet minutes, he sat back on his heels and looked up at her. "Why does Dad not like you?" Claire's breath didn't catch, but her hands paused mid-motion. She sat back slowly and wiped the dirt from her palms, taking her time, not rushing toward an answer. "Some people," she said, her voice low and even, "don't always understand the difference between love and control. They think being in charge of someone is the same as caring for them, and when they lose that control, they call it betrayal." Tommy tilted his head like he was thinking it over. "So, you didn't listen to him?" Claire smiled gently. Number I stopped obeying him. "That's different." Tommy didn't ask anything else. He stood, brushing soil from his jeans, and walked toward the porch steps. Halfway up, he turned around. "I like your house better." Claire looked at him, really looked at him, and saw it. Not just the echo of Ryan's face, but something separate, something clearer, an openness that hadn't yet learned how to shut itself off. "I like it better when you're in it," she said. That evening, after Tommy had gone to bed, curled under the quilt she'd saved from his father's old room, Claire sat at her writing desk by the front window. The sun had long dipped behind the tree line, and the sky had taken on that deep blue that signaled the tail end of twilight. She opened her file marked Estate Revision, Contingency Clauses, and wrote carefully in black ink, "To Thomas Hensley, full title and ownership of the primary residence and agricultural acreage to be transferred without restriction upon reaching the age of 25, until that time held in protected trust." She paused, then underlined the words, "without restriction." The fire crackled low behind her. She didn't need to reread what she had written. She knew what it meant. It wasn't a gift, it was a safeguard. An antidote to what had been denied to her, and what had already begun creeping toward her grandson. Claire closed the folder and tucked it into the bottom drawer of her desk. It made a soft click when it shut, final, but not heavy. Claire had never liked Sunday dinners at Ryan's house. They were never really invitations, more like obligations wrapped in lukewarm civility. But this time she agreed. Not for reconciliation, not even for peace. She agreed because she was done letting silence be mistaken for submission. She didn't arrive alone. Marcia sat beside her in the passenger seat, dressed in dark corduroy and a long coat, the kind she used to wear to board meetings and city council hearings. Her presence wasn't loud, but it was definitive. Evelyn followed behind in her own car, punctual as always, pulling into the driveway with the quiet authority of someone used to managing conflict with a signature and a timestamp. Ryan opened the door before Claire could knock. He raised an eyebrow when he saw Marcia behind her. "Didn't know we were doing +1s," he said, voice flat. Claire stepped past him into the hallway. "Dinner's always better with witnesses." Marcia gave Ryan a nod, not unfriendly, but not warm either. Evelyn entered last, clutching her leather folio in one hand. Ryan looked at her, puzzled. "I'm sorry, have we met?" he asked, tone sharper than curious. Evelyn extended her hand with a professional smile. "Evelyn Marks. I represent your mother in matters of estate and property." Ryan's expression faltered. His hand didn't reach out to meet hers. "Why is your attorney here?" Claire removed her coat slowly, hung it with care on the wooden rack near the door. "Because this is the last time I plan to eat dinner at a table where I'm not wanted." Emily emerged from the kitchen, drying her hands on a dish towel. She didn't speak, just looked from Claire to Evelyn to Ryan, reading the air like someone realizing the temperature had shifted too late to do anything about it. Dinner was already on the table: roast chicken, a pan of cornbread, and a salad that wilted slightly under the overhead lights. They sat awkwardly. Ryan dug in first, as if to claim the territory before anyone else could. Conversation stumbled forward. Marcia made a remark about the weather. Emily nodded and murmured something about how unpredictable April had been. Claire said little. She wasn't there for small talk. Evelyn hadn't touched her food at all. Tommy entered halfway through the meal, pajama-clad and yawning, hair askew from an early bedtime that hadn't stuck. He froze when he saw Evelyn, then lit up when his eyes found Claire. "Grandma!" Claire opened her arms and pulled him in for a quiet hug. He buried his face into her cardigan, small arms gripping her waist. She rested her cheek against the top of his head, inhaling the familiar scent of apples and shampoo. Ryan cleared his throat. "Tommy, it's late." Tommy looked up but didn't move. Claire gently let go and stood. She turned toward Evelyn, who nodded and opened her folio with practiced precision. From it, she withdrew a folder, neatly tabbed and labeled, and handed it to Claire. Inside were the final documents: updated land transfer details, amendment clauses, and a formal cover letter outlining the completed reallocation of the estate. Claire took it in both hands, her fingers steady. "This is done," she said quietly. "Everything that needed to be said has been documented, signed, filed." Ryan didn't speak, but his jaw tightened. Emily sat straighter, looking at the folder, then at Evelyn. Marcia sipped her water. "No surprises left now. That's a gift, really." Claire looked at each of them in turn. "I came tonight to end something, not to argue, just to be clear." She turned to Tommy again. "I'll see you soon, sweetheart." He nodded, eyes wide and uncertain. Ryan stood abruptly. "You're making a scene in front of my kid." Claire held his gaze, unmoved. "I'm making a boundary." The registered envelope arrived on a Thursday just after noon. Ryan wasn't home when the mailman knocked, but Emily was, folding laundry with the afternoon news humming in the background. She signed without thinking, then stared at the thick white envelope in her hands. Her name was typed cleanly on the front. The return address read, "Marks and Associates, Estate Council." She set it on the kitchen counter. It sat untouched for nearly half an hour. When Ryan walked through the door later, still stiff from physical therapy, frustration pouring off him in visible waves, he didn't even look at it. "Did they call back about the insurance?" he asked, tossing his keys down. "Because I swear to God, if they keep dragging their feet—" "There's something from your mom's lawyer," Emily said, nodding at the envelope. That caught his attention. He picked it up, flipped it over. His name wasn't on the front. His fingers gripped it tighter. "Why the hell is this addressed to you?" Emily opened hers carefully, reading in silence. Ryan tore into his like a threat had been issued. Inside was a single-page letter. Short, cold, final. "This letter is to formally notify you that following recent legal and financial restructuring, you have been removed as a beneficiary from all estate-related trusts, deeds, and fiduciary responsibilities. No further claim or inheritance shall be granted. This decision is final and irreversible. Claire E. Hensley, sole executor." Ryan's face went blank for a beat. Then he read it again, jaw clenched, breath shortening. "This isn't real," he muttered. "She doesn't mean it." Emily looked down at her own letter. The wording was nearly identical. "She filed this. She signed it. Evelyn Marks notarized it," she said slowly, as if trying to walk herself through the truth. Ryan dropped the envelope onto the floor. "It's just a message. It's leverage. That's all." Emily didn't argue. She just sat down. In Claire's house, miles away, the same afternoon sun filtered through the kitchen windows, casting long gold bars across the tiled floor. The room smelled faintly of coffee and fresh rosemary. She'd just come in from the porch herb garden. On the fridge, she pinned a folded piece of paper that had arrived earlier in the week. It was a drawing from Tommy, a crooked red barn, a woman with short gray hair holding a watering can, a garden full of bright orange squash. Across the top, in clumsy but careful handwriting, "Thank you for my grandma's farm." Claire stared at it for a long time. Then she smiled, not softly, not sadly, but with the kind of still satisfaction that comes from naming something. Finally, for what it is. She walked to her desk and pulled out the letter she had written the night after the dinner. Not legal, not for court. Just a single-page statement. Her voice uncluttered. Inheritance is not entitlement. You don't get to claim what you never respected. I built something. I protected it. I reclaimed it. That's legacy. And it is not yours. She folded it once, slipped it into an envelope addressed to Evelyn. For the records. That evening, her phone rang. Unknown number. She didn't answer. But she played the voicemail later, standing in the hallway with the lights off. Ryan's voice came through, low and cold. "You'll regret this. You always go too far. I'll make sure the rest of the family hears about what you've done." Claire didn't delete it. She didn't save it either. She simply let it expire in the background while she stood there, breathing through the echo. Outside, the wind had picked up again. The trees moved slowly in the dusk, like they were turning over in their sleep. In the silence of that hallway, surrounded by hand-picked furniture and a life she'd reassembled plank by plank, Claire reached into the fireproof box. She added one more document. The Community Stewardship Agreement. Signed, sealed, state-registered. A permanent shift. From now on, the farmland would serve something larger than any heir. Not Ryan, not even Tommy. Just the soil. The people who needed it, and the woman who claimed it back. The town paper ran the story on a Wednesday, tucked between a column about zoning ordinances and a recipe for rhubarb crisp. Just a few paragraphs beneath the headline, "Local Farmhouse Transitions into Community Learning Hub." Claire didn't seek attention. She hadn't asked for a spotlight, but Evelyn had advised transparency once the stewardship agreement became public record, and the youth initiative had a small but earnest PR team eager to highlight their newest partnership. So Claire agreed. One photo, a quote. Her conditions were simple. No mention of Ryan and no editorializing about family legacy. This wasn't about blood. It was about intention. The photo was taken in front of the barn, its siding freshly painted the same deep red it had always been. Claire stood with a half-dozen teenagers, each holding a shovel or rake, dirt on their jeans and cautious pride in their postures. She didn't smile wide, just enough to show that her presence there was by choice, not necessity. They'd started the first workshop the week prior. Local kids, some from the school's alternative program, others just bored and curious, had signed up to learn the basics: composting, crop rotation, how to tell good soil from stubborn clay. Claire taught the morning classes herself, not because she had to, but because it mattered who taught them. By the third session, one boy had asked to take home an old trowel. Another brought a mason jar full of worms to give back to the earth. They were small gestures, but they were honest. Claire understood now that the most lasting legacies didn't start with inheritance. They started with permission to grow, to fail, to begin again. The farmhouse itself had taken on new shape. Evelyn helped set up the nonprofit entity, and Claire donated the structure outright under the condition that she could live in the back wing as long as she wanted. The front became a classroom. The kitchen, once a space for quiet dinners and echoing silence, now hosted coffee-fueled lesson plans and seedling trays under grow lights. She had a brass plaque mounted discreetly by the porch stairs. It read, "The land remembers kindness." Below that, Claire E. Hensley, steward and founding partner. It wasn't grand, but it was permanent. Elsewhere in town, the effects of her decision were beginning to ripple. Emily's divorce petition was filed quietly, the way most of her choices were. No headlines, no accusations, just a signature on the bottom of a page and a slow pull away. She didn't tell Claire directly, but the courthouse clerk was Marcia's niece, and Marcia still believed in women looking out for each other. Ryan, stripped of legal footing and marital stability in the same breath, packed a single duffel and moved in with an old college friend who lived in a duplex behind a laundromat. Claire didn't need the address. She didn't ask for updates. She did, however, update her own records. One afternoon, she sat at the dining table with a mug of tea cooling beside her and pulled out the emergency contact sheet she kept tucked behind the fridge magnet, the same one she and Alan had once filled out for doctors, travel agents, and tax folders. She scanned the list. Evelyn's name remained. Marcia's too. Tommy, now listed as secondary, next to a note in her handwriting, minor, legal protections in place until 25. And then, at the bottom, Ryan's name. She crossed it out slowly, with deliberate pressure, and rewrote the line. Removed. No medical authority. No notification requested. She sat back, letting the pen fall beside her. It rolled once, then stilled. Claire knew he was coming before she saw him. The sound of gravel crunching under tires, the sudden stillness in the yard, even the way the air seemed to hang heavier, it all telegraphed his presence the way weather does before a storm. She was standing at the edge of the porch, wiping down a clay-stained trowel from that morning's lesson, when Ryan's car pulled up halfway into the drive and then stopped, skewed, like even the vehicle was unsure whether to fully commit. He didn't kill the engine. He just climbed out, slammed the door hard enough to send a bird scattering from the eaves, and stood at the bottom of the steps. Claire didn't move. Ryan looked thinner than he had last time, less angry in his posture, but more brittle in his movements. He stared at her with a face that had once resembled Alan's when he was still capable of charm, but today it looked worn down to its bones, scraped clean of pretense. "You won't even pick up the phone anymore," he said. Claire said nothing. "I came all the way here and you're just gonna stand there?" Still, nothing. He stepped forward, one foot on the first porch step, but no farther. "You think this is some kind of moral victory? You think signing papers and handing a bunch of dirt over to teenagers makes you a saint now?" His voice wavered, louder than it needed to be. "You gave away everything. You erased me." Claire didn't flinch, her hand stilled on the trowel. Her eyes never left his. "I know what this is," Ryan said, his voice hardening. "You're punishing me because you can't punish Dad anymore." A pause. Claire's tone was even, her words careful. "I'm not punishing anyone. I'm making sure the damage doesn't repeat." He took another step, but didn't cross the threshold. His hand hovered in midair like he didn't know whether to point or plead. "You really believe he'd be okay with this?" he demanded. "Dad would have never let you shut me out. He would have never let this happen." Claire set the trowel down quietly on the porch rail, then met his gaze fully, without resentment, without pity. "No," she said. "He's not here. And you made sure I wasn't either." The words settled like dust in the still air between them. Ryan opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came. His eyes scanned her face, looking for something that might still be soft. There was nothing left for him there. Not hate, not comfort, just absence. She stepped back from the porch rail, turned, and walked to the front door. "Claire!" he called out. She didn't turn around. He tried again, more sharply this time. "You can't just erase your own son?" Her hand rested on the doorknob, still cold from the air. "I didn't erase you," she said, without looking back. "You just stopped being part of the picture." She opened the door. The hinge let out a long, dry groan. Behind her, Ryan stood motionless at the foot of the steps, shoulders sinking like something final had just been named. Claire stepped inside and closed the door with quiet precision. The mornings came quietly now. Claire woke just before the light, the kind of early that used to come with obligation. Alan's coffee, the weight of unspoken tension, the need to fill the silence with something resembling routine. Now the silence was clean, earned. She moved through it slowly, barefoot across cool floors, the scent of coffee rising ahead of her like a promise. On the porch, the air still held a trace of frost, but the sun reached farther each day. She sat with a blanket across her lap, a chipped ceramic mug in one hand, and the farm stretching open in front of her like a second chance that didn't ask to be forgiven, only tended. Marcia arrived on most Thursdays, often unannounced, but always welcome. She brought scones from a bakery in town, muttered complaints about the rising price of eggs, and insisted on watering the porch plants before they talked about anything important. They sat together in rocking chairs, legs tucked under them, sipping strong coffee from mismatched mugs, while the wind moved gently through the maple branches. "You did it," Marcia said once, not looking at Claire. "You unhooked yourself." Claire didn't answer right away. She watched a student wheel a barrow full of mulch across the south edge of the field. A redhead, Lexi maybe, whose nervous hands had steadied over the last few weeks. "I didn't unhook," Claire said finally. "I just stopped dragging what wouldn't follow." The morning classes moved at a rhythm Claire liked. Quiet instruction, gentle correction, nothing too fast or loud. She walked the students through pruning tomatoes, balancing compost with kitchen scraps, testing soil pH with strips dipped in mason jars. She kept the topics simple, not because they weren't smart, but because no one had ever shown them how to notice small things. Some of them didn't stay. Others did. Tommy came every other weekend now, dropped off by a court-approved third party from Emily's side. He never cried about it. Never questioned why things were so structured. He'd learned to move through rules the same way his grandmother had learned to move through grief, accept the edges, then make something grow inside them. He always brought his sketch pad, sat in the corner of the porch or in the shade of the barn, and drew what he saw. Earthworms, boots, the curled green rise of new leaves. He still didn't say much, but Claire had learned to hear what mattered. "I drew you," he said once, handing her a page with careful pencil lines. She stood in the middle of the page, one hand in the dirt, the other holding a seedling. "You look busy," she said, smiling. Tommy nodded. "That's how I know you're happy." Later that same week, Claire found a thick envelope in her mailbox with Evelyn's return address printed in the top left corner. Inside was the final copy of the recorded will, registered, archived, and signed across multiple county and state offices. Everything she'd built was now legally permanent, her name as sole executor, trustee, and founder, Tommy's inheritance sealed until he was old enough to understand it on his own terms. Claire sat with it for a long time. The sun had already dipped, throwing long shadows across the porch floor. She ran her fingers across the raised notary seal, then rose and walked to the hallway closet. She opened the fireproof box. Inside were only a few things now. The deed, the stewardship agreement, a letter for Tommy, another for Evelyn. She added the new will carefully, made sure it sat flat. Then she locked the box. The courtroom was smaller than Claire expected. It smelled faintly of varnished wood and recycled paper, and the acoustics carried even the softest cough like a confession. The judge's bench stood elevated but plain. No grandeur, no drama, just procedure. Claire sat beside Evelyn at the petitioner's table, her hands folded calmly on the legal pad in front of her. She wore dark gray slacks, a navy blouse, and her mother's wedding band on a chain around her neck. Her hair was pinned back neatly, no makeup except for lip balm. She looked like someone who belonged in this space, not because she was fighting, but because she wasn't running. Ryan sat across the aisle, flanked by a lawyer Claire didn't recognize. Young, probably eager for courtroom experience. He leaned in and whispered things throughout the hearing, but Ryan didn't seem to be listening. His gaze stayed, fixed on Claire, like if he stared long enough, the years might undo themselves. He hadn't looked well. His jaw was tight, eyes ringed with fatigue, suit slightly too big in the shoulders. It looked borrowed. Maybe it was. The clerk read the case summary into the record. Ryan Hensley vs. Claire Hensley, petition for legal review of mental competency and undue influence regarding estate distribution. Claire sat still as her name was read aloud, unmoved. She had been called worse in smaller rooms. The judge, a woman in her late 50s with graying hair pulled into a low chignon, skimmed the initial file before nodding toward Ryan's counsel. The attorney launched into a well-rehearsed statement. Claire had acted irrationally, had excluded family members with emotional vendettas, had demonstrated disruptive volatility and obsessive behavior toward legacy control. Words like coercion, mental decline, Questionable lucidity all floated into the transcript like weeds trying to take root. Claire said nothing. Evelyn, as always, waited. When it was their turn, Evelyn stood and began without theatrics. Her voice was clean, neutral, precise. Your Honor, we submit the following into evidence. Video footage from a recorded estate signing conducted under state protocol, signed logs from each financial transfer, verified by notary, letters of evaluation from Claire's physician, therapist, and the county's mental health evaluator, each confirming full cognitive clarity and independence. We also submit that Claire initiated the legal restructuring after 10 months of professional estate counsel and documentation. The judge read silently, flipping through each affidavit. Evelyn continued, Lastly, we request the court consider the petitioner's documented history of harassment, including threats left on voicemail and his removal from prior financial responsibilities due to mismanagement. Ryan's lawyer objected. We argue that such voicemails were emotional responses, not threats, and irrelevant to her mental state. The judge held up a hand. I'll decide what's relevant. She turned the page, read quietly, looked at Claire. Mrs. Hensley, would you like to make a statement? Claire rose. Her knees clicked softly, but her voice did not waver. I've spent over 6 decades in a house built on someone else's rules. I rewrote those rules because I saw what happens when silence is mistaken for sanity. I've done nothing under duress, and nothing I've done is impulsive. I protected what matters, not from my son, but from what he's become. She sat back down. The room stayed still. The judge folded her hands, took one last look at the file, and exhaled. Petition denied, with prejudice. The record reflects no evidence of incapacity, no coercion, and no legal basis for reversal. Case closed. Ryan stood stunned. His lawyer said something clipped under his breath, already gathering files. Claire didn't move. She didn't smile. She didn't look at Ryan again. She simply rose, buttoned her coat, and walked out of the courtroom with Evelyn beside her. The envelope was thick, linen-stocked, and sealed with the kind of care usually reserved for goodbyes. Claire labeled it in her own handwriting, steady, deliberate, the way she'd once signed report cards and birthday cards and field trip forms. To Tommy, open on your 25th birthday. From your grandmother, with context. She placed it inside a file folder along with a second copy of the deed, this one reissued in his name, and marked with a future date. Claire had double-checked the language with Evelyn the week prior. It was airtight, his to own, not inherit, not contest. It was a strange thing, giving away something you would never live to see opened. But it wasn't the first time she'd chosen legacy over presence. It was just the first time she wasn't apologizing for it. She slipped the folder into the fireproof box, next to the notarized will, next to her final journal entries, next to the stewardship plan that made everything permanent. Later, she returned to the porch with her tea and a soft leather-bound book. Her journal, nearly full now. Not every entry was profound. Some were little more than observations about seedlings or grocery lists scrawled in the margins. But this one she thought about before she wrote. July 3rd. No parent wins everything, but I claimed my peace, and maybe that's what makes room for someone else's happiness to grow. She didn't underline anything. She didn't need to. Out in the fields, the youth program students were planting sunflowers near the road. Lexi was back, her hair tied up in a pink scarf. She laughed at something one of the boys said, her voice cutting across the open air like something soft but sure of itself. Claire watched from the porch and didn't wave. She didn't want to interrupt the rhythm they were building. She hadn't seen Ryan since the hearing. Marcia told her gently that he'd left town, moved in with an old friend in Spokane. No forward. Address, no goodbye. Claire didn't ask which friend, she didn't ask why. Instead, she sent Evelyn a small handwritten thank you card and a bottle of French gin Evelyn once joked about affording only when retirement came. 2 weeks later, Claire received a response. Claire, it was an honor to hold the line beside you. The fund is secure, the trust is active, and my successor is fully briefed. I'm going to the coast. Maybe I'll start a garden. Don't call unless it's about wine. Claire smiled, folded the note in half and tucked it inside the back of her journal. The next morning she woke to the sound of the screen door creaking open. Marcia, early again, carrying blueberry muffins in a canvas tote and muttering something about how bees were nesting in her car's passenger side mirror. They sat together on the porch in their usual chairs, splitting the muffins and watching the haze burn off the fields. The sky was wide and undecided, clouds moving like old regrets that didn't quite know where to land. Claire took a breath and smelled rosemary, wet earth, and the warm sugar of baked fruit. She turned to Marcia. "Do you think it ever stops mattering?" she asked. Marcia didn't need to ask what she meant. "No," she said, "but it stops controlling the shape of your days. That part's yours again." Claire nodded. "Then I'll keep filling them with things that grow." The grave hadn't changed. It still sat on the quiet eastern hill above the town cemetery, where the pines grew dense and wind moved low across the grass, like it was brushing secrets back into the dirt. Claire hadn't been there in over a year. Not because she was angry, not anymore. Just because she no longer mistook absence for avoidance. She parked by the gate and walked the path alone, her boots crunching gently over gravel softened by last week's rain. The air was clean. Honest. The kind that didn't offer warmth but didn't lie either. Alan's headstone stood simple, gray granite with no embellishment beyond name, rank, and years. She had chosen not to add words beneath his. No beloved, no devoted. That had once felt like restraint. Now, it felt like truth. She knelt beside the stone, her knees stiff but steady. In her hand, she held a folded letter, creased once down the middle, written in Tommy's cautious script. "Dear Grandpa, I didn't know you, but I think you were good at some things. Thank you for the farm. I'll take care of it. Love, Tommy." Claire didn't cry. There was no catharsis in her chest, just a clean space where resentment had once nested like something half alive. She placed the letter under the smooth edge of the marker and pressed it down with a flat stone. No ceremony. No whispered goodbyes. Only this. "I brought you forgiveness, Alan. Not for you. For me." She stood and walked back toward her car. The wind rose behind her, but it didn't follow. The farm buzzed with quiet energy that afternoon. The open house had been on the calendar for weeks, a way to invite the town, the students' families, and curious newcomers into the rhythms of what the land had become. Not a relic, not a retreat, a working place. A learning one. Claire moved through the barn's side entrance, past tables lined with handmade seed packets, rain barrels labeled with student art, and 3 trays of muffins Marcia had insisted on baking that morning, even though she claimed to hate baking. People wandered between rows of herbs and hoop houses. Tommy stood near the compost station explaining to a retired mechanic how to turn coffee grounds into topsoil. His shoulders were straighter now, his words clearer. Claire wore simple denim, her hair pinned back, boots laced tight. She carried no notes when she stepped onto the barn's makeshift stage. The crowd quieted, folding into a hush that was more reverent than expectant. Claire spoke just one line. "You choose what grows, even after grief." Then she stepped down, returning to the field like the words had always been meant to be planted, not remembered. Dusk came in slow. Later, Claire and Tommy walked the edge of the property, the line where the cultivated rows gave way to wild grass and brush, where the new fence marked the boundary but didn't close the view. Tommy kicked at a clump of soil, then looked up. "Will I be ready when I'm old enough?" Claire looked down at him, the top of his head just catching the gold of the sinking sun. "You're already more ready than most people ever get," she said, "because you're still asking the right questions." He nodded and tucked his hands into his jacket pockets. The wind moved through the trees beyond them like a slow inhale, then held. They walked on in silence. He thought surviving was a mistake, but survival was my legacy, not his. Claire and Tommy, side by side, walking toward the horizon where the field opened, wild, rich, waiting. And in the distance, a barn that no longer echoed, just stood, steady, remembered.